let's go ahead with and get started. Good morning. This is the Government Operations and Health Facilities Subcommittee of Health and Government Operations. We have 6 bills to consider today in subcommittee, and we will start with, Delegate Hill is here. So let's start with HB 6. Lindsay, can you bring us up to date?
Sure. This bill was discussed in subcommittee last week. It's the bill that requires the Department of General Services to establish standards for state buildings to conserve energy and minimize adverse impacts on birds and minimize lighting as specified. State buildings constructed, substantially altered, or acquired shall meet the standards to the extent practicable and within budgetary constraints. DGS must reduce lighting of existing state buildings, and DGS is required to update the standards every 5 years. Last week, the subcommittee looked at an amendment that was a technical correction, clarifying the terminology related to the innovation credit. So that was an amendment that was shared with you again this week in the email. Then you also received 2 additional amendments from Delegate Hill. These were 2 different options being proposed that was in relation to the question raised last week regarding leased buildings. So the first option was labeled option 1, would just clarify that the bill does not apply to in any way to leased buildings leased by the state. And the second option, and these were both sent in a reprint form rather than amendment form, sorry. The second option would say that the bill generally does not apply to leased buildings except for the requirements to reduce lighting in existing buildings and only applies to, so there's 2 provisions. One is to reduce lighting, and the second sort of piece of that is to reduce lighting by using automatic control technologies, which might include timers, photosensors, infrared detectors, and motion detectors. And that piece of the reduced lighting would only apply if the state is responsible for internal renovations to the building and at the time that the state actually does make renovations to that leased building.
Delegate Hill, will you speak to your amendments?
Sure. I think in the conversation last week, the reality that the bill wasn't really clear on whether leased buildings were covered or not was raised, and I think that was something that we've missed in the discussion over the last 4 years or 5 years. So I think that we talked to General Services and tried to get a sense of what are we responsible for when we lease? So we're leasing, for instance, the Social Security buildings in downtown Baltimore. Some of those leases are like 10 to 20-year leases, right? And since part of the goal here is to save taxpayer money, if we're leasing and we're responsible for those electrical costs, then some of the standards that General Services develop, things like, turning the lights out when the building is empty. Certain kinds of other standards should, I believe, still apply, still within, budgetary constraints and where applicable, so that language would still apply. And so that's what the second amendment is. It says, if we're not paying for renovations and we're not paying for all this other stuff, then we don't have to do that. But at the same time, if we give specifications to the owner of the building, they're going to renovate for our purposes, and we're going to tell them how many rooms we want and what fixtures we want, and they're going to start that from the planning stage. If we're responsible for those costs, then we can certainly tell them we want you to install these kind of devices during the renovation. General Services has sent out a cost document, which essentially shows that retrofitting does cost us if we're not, but anytime we can put timers and things in advance. So if we have a new building, we can put those timers in, there's de minimis cost. And it would be the same thing if we're going to do, if we have to have like the Social Security building renovated anyway, and we already have a budget set for that, if those light timers can be put in at the owner's cost and we can make that specification, it just seems to me that it makes sense to do that. All that being said, the First Amendment, which says leases don't apply, is the simplest one for us to wrap our heads around. And so I'm fine offering that one. I don't think it's the most responsible one, but that's why I offer 2 amendments. We can keep it simple, but we can try and be the best stewards of the taxpayers' money.
Thank you. There was also a question about additional cost. Last week, some people were worried because the fiscal note was unclear.
Yep. So again, General Services sent out a document, and I just got it over to Lindsay this morning. Is it something we can share on the screen, Lindsay?
Sure. I actually literally just sent it out to everyone, but let me see. First, I have to pull up the document. And then let's see if I
Right.
can-
But essentially, again, if it's a new building, and we're building into it, the cost of doing these light fixtures is about, I think, let me see if I can pull the document up myself.
it says that host disabled participant shares screen sharing. So I
Host
can't share my
disabled.
screen. Yeah,
You're
I'm sure. I
disabled.
think it's a setting of the Zoom meeting.
Okay, all right, so everyone, it was just sent, let me just find this document.
It was
Anyway.
just circulated to the same email addresses that you all received to the meeting, the rest of the meeting documents.
Okay. So it's, so this is from General Services, and it says for existing facilities, if all we were doing was retrofitting them, and nothing else, we're going to retrofit all of them. It would be, we have 1,400 facilities. And the lighting controls are about $3 each. And the lighting control cost for facility is $55,000. So it'd be $156 million if we, and again, the bill doesn't call us for retrofitting things unless, there's already a renovation going on. So we don't ask for that because of that. For new facilities, over $500,000, the cost to implement controls for windows and lighting are less than 1% of the total project costs. And again, the difference has to do with the fact that they're having to put lighting and fixtures in anyway, and the cost of the fixtures is just they're pretty much comparable. So that's the difference in the fact that we're talking about a pretty large number. If we were retrofitting every building, is why the bill doesn't call for retrofitting every building.
Worst case scenario, $156 million does every building.
Right.
Delegate Kaiser?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Delegate Hill, I apologize. In the description of the 2 amendments, you said one of them might be easier and more acceptable, but not as good. And can you explain why again? Because I want to make sure
So
I understand.
Thank you, Delegate. So the bill has a couple of components, right? There's one component that says if we're doing major renovations, then we change the facade of the building to minimize, where appropriate, to minimize the loss of energy through the windows. It also mitigates the birds, and the changes that fit the credit happen to lower energy costs. So we do that. The second part of the bill is that there are standards of how we use energy in the buildings that include things like putting timers on the lights. So when the building or the office space is empty, sort of like we have over here in the House building. So when I'm not in my office, my lights are out, but when I walk into my office, they automatically turn on, right? So it calls for the state to do things like that to save energy. So those are the 2 components. So the first amendment says just exclude all state leased buildings from this bill completely. They don't have to do the facade, and they don't have to do light controls or any of the other things that would help save energy. So that's a simple one because it just says we exclude all leases from this bill. The other one says, well, as the leasee, we're not responsible for those external alterations. So we're not gonna assume any cost for doing any of that stuff, and we don't have to put that part of the bill in. But to the extent that we're using the energy of, we're actually paying for, even as a leasing, we're paying for the energy cost of using the building, then we should try to minimize those energy costs as much as possible. And so where it fits within our budgetary constraints, such as when we're requiring the landlord to do some renovations before we take hold of the property. We can specify as you're doing those renovations, we want you to put these fixtures in, and that's not going to cost us more.
Delegate, Mr. Chairman, so to clarify, number 1 just says exclude buildings we lease, and number 2 says in certain situations when we lease, something should be covered, but we're not specifying necessarily in the bill.
Correct.
That boiled down. Okay, thank you. That helps me. Thank you.
Look at your leg.
Thank you. I was looking for my unmute button. So I'm reading the fiscal note again. Lighting in state buildings on page, it's not numbered, second to the end. DGS has previously advised the bill's requirement to lower lighting levels in state buildings applies to 4,000 state buildings. Only 23 have these automatic controls. So out of 4,000 buildings, 23 comply. So I'm surprised at this Excel chart from DGS because it has 1,400 facilities on here when the fiscal note says 4,000. So, and additionally, we asked if you could get a cost in the places this is being done, because last week you had mentioned San Francisco and Chicago. And, we had asked if you could, if the sponsor, Delegate Hill, could get any kind of cost for us on that.
So for the first part, we've got, I think Mr. Dean from DGS is here, and I will pull up that other information while he's got his hand up. So if you could call him, Mr. Chair.
Mr. Neal, go ahead.
Thank you. So first, I just want to state that DGS firmly supports the first version of the amendment where it excludes all leases. This is partially because if the state, which is pretty common in leases, has the right to terminate for convenience or other reasons, that would affect a building that retrofits or renovates to meet these standards, but the state is no longer a tenant there. And also, if the state is also only renting a small portion of that building, we don't want to have them retrofit or renovate just, if we're renting 1 or 2 floors. So just for those sorts of situations, we are firmly supporting version 1. Also, when it comes to the DGS facilities and estimate cost Excel sheet that you have, I believe our chief of design, Steve Loria, is in the waiting room for the call or should be joining shortly. He gathers some of these numbers, but part of the issue is that, from my understanding, is that 1, this is rough estimates. We would need to do a really in-depth analysis to really look at the total costs that this would have, which will take some time. But part of it is with the new facilities, it is less than 1% of the construction costs. So incorporating it into new buildings would be very feasible.
And Delegate Hill, am I correct in thinking that the budget for a renovation is the budget for a renovation? If it can handle these mitigation enhancements, it does. If it can't, then it's not required to.
Exactly. That's an excellent way to explain it.
I didn't hear you. Can you repeat that, Delegate Hill? I'm sorry.
Yeah. So essentially, when a department sets out to do a renovation or to build a building, there's a budget, and that budget is set, and what fits under the budget fits under the budget, and what doesn't. So, for example, if I were doing a renovation of my home, and I said, I'd like for it to be, have a certain look or whatever, the architect and the engineer are going to say, well, if you want to do that, we can put, we can do, 2 fireplaces. But if you want to use this kind of material in the fireplace, it's going to be this much more than your budget. If you want to stay in budget, what we can do instead is either take it down to one fireplace and use the material that you're asking for, or we can use less expensive material and keep the two fireplaces. So there's a discussion. And so the way the bill is written and the way General Services understands, and I think why they support it is nothing is required unless it fits under the budget that is preset. And within that budget, the state will do what it can to lower the energy cost of the building over the life of the building.
Well, I would ask this question. As a contractor for 35 years, having done work in commercial buildings, I've always had an RFP. So if the state wants to do a renovation, they'll put an RFP out and it will have all the requirements in it. It doesn't work like, in my experience, like you renovating your house, and the state is then under guidelines under a number of things, but usually it's lowest bidder. So it's rare in my experience when they put it out and say, we're renovating this building, budget's 400,000, what are you going to give us for that? That actually makes it very complicated for a contractor because you're not bidding apples to apples. So, this has not been my experience. So if you're going to put these requirements in the RFP, it's going to cost more, which you said, quote, at the owner's cost at one point. Well, the owner, that's the state. So
No.
it's going to cost the state more. But just so you know that my experience with an RFP, and I did commercial construction 35 years, you can't cherry pick your contractors and say, Whiting Turner come in. I mean, you can on occasion, but most projects have an RFP with requirements written into them. So
Right.
Your bill is going to write these requirements in, and that's why we need a better cost of
Yeah.
what we're talking about.
So absolutely, Delegate. So my understanding from talking with the architects and the department is that you're absolutely right. The RFP is written, but it is written based on what they know the general cost of different things. So they know what it costs to do paint instead of wallpaper. They know what those ranges are. So they put the RFP in, but they've already calculated what they expect those costs to be, right? And so that's how they get to the specifics that allow, the contractor to use whatever variables they have in terms of the subcontractors and the fees and whatever else you all play, you will certainly know that more than me. But my understanding is that that is not an issue, right? So they're not going to, and that's why we put the language in there, within budgetary constraint. Now, as far as the previous question you had, the information I have, and this was sent out to me from Hope Copland, my Chris Parts, this is an architectural firm, is that, and I'll just read what it says, I've seen 20 to 40% energy savings from the study. So payback depends on the cost of retrofit controls, with payback very fast for large buildings, with more energy consumption and less for smaller buildings. So so that's the number that we were able to get by looking at buildings where this has been done. It's a 20 to 40% energy savings. But again, it's over the energy life of the building. Now, Delegate Shalega, you also said about the owner. So I was referencing the owner when I was talking about the two amendments about whether we exclude leases from this or not. And the department has weighed in that they think it's just best to exclude all leased buildings from this legislation, and I'm fine with that. So I would move the First Amendment.
Yes, and I think as we stated last week, Delegate Hill, we all believe in saving energy, all of us. I mean, we're here to mitigate all kinds of environmental things and save energy, but we also have a fiduciary responsibility to taxpayers to know, what the cost is with the bird side and the energy side. And are you still pushing them together, or are you bifurcating the energy and offering the bill without the bird safe?
I don't understand. The bird safe The bird stuff are the energy savings. That's where
Okay.
the energy savings comes from.
All right, thank you.
Those are the changes that have been proven to save the cost of the building on energy. Those are the savings. That's where they come from. They're not separate.
You, Delegate Kaiser?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Appreciate hearing Delegate Shalega's perspective, and Delegate, we have a plumbing project I'd like to talk to you about. But when you mentioned the fiduciary responsibility, I mean, I think we owe our taxpayers more than that, in that we have fiduciary responsibility, but I also feel like we have an environmental responsibility of ensuring that the next generation has a good environment, because the costs in their lifetime will end up being well more if we don't do that. But my question, Delegate Hill, is one of the things I thought I heard you say was some kind of safety net or caveat or whatever, if within budgetary constraints. Could our state government then argue that it never fits the constraints and never go forward? And then your bill doesn't have any teeth where well, maybe that's the wrong word when we're talking about the safety of birds, but I want to ensure that your bill makes the state in a lot of cases do these steps and take these steps. And so I'm afraid that your safety valve could end up being used too much by the executive branch to say, nope, it's not worth doing, or it's not within the cost. So I guess I'm trying to help strike that balance.
Right. So I think what we've negotiated over the last several years about, where practicable and within budgetary constraints has to do with the fact that we're writing legislation that covers a wide range of state buildings, right? I don't think you could certainly imagine an administration that would say we're never going to do this. I just can't imagine why they would, because it is the prudent thing to do on both sides, as you say, both for environmental reasons. It's the prudent thing to do for economic reasons. It's the prudent thing to do for the ecology. It's the rare time where there's a win-win-win, right? And so we're just not going to bother. Yeah, you could, but I know that the previous administration, for instance, was, after we first introduced the bill, Governor Hogan administered an executive order saying, I think it was by 2035, that our buildings would be more energy sufficient, right? So it was a little bit far out, and it wasn't strong enough. But I hear your concern. I'm not really worried that this language is going to give any administration free rein to do nothing. But there may be someone else on the call who can speak to that.
Also, I'd like to remind the committee we have 5 more bills on the agenda today.
And Mr. Chair, I did move the amendment. I guess there's no second. So.
Second.
Amendment version number 1 moved and seconded. Delegate Chisholm, are you speaking to the amendment?
Yeah, I'm sorry, Delegate Hill. Can you give me a quick paraphrase of what the amendment does again that we're voting on?
I think
I'll
it
ask Lindsay
exempts
to
all
do that.
rental properties.
I'll ask Lindsay to do that. Right. Well,
Yep,
should
it
be second.
clarifies that nothing that's in the bill applies to building leased by the state. So when the bill says state building, no, not leased state buildings.
Thank you, Lindsay.
Okay, we have a motion and a second on the amendment. Can I get a vote for all those in favor? Anyone opposed to the amendment? Okay, the amendment passes. Do I have a favorable motion?
And I'll
on
note that
the-
there's still the technical amendment that you all have not voted either, the
Okay. does
terminology.
Someone want to move the
Move the technical amendment.
Second.
What's the technical amendment? Hold up, please remind us.
That's the one that clarifies the terminology for the innovation credit.
It's no longer a pilot. And the language as the bill was drafted still refers to it as a pilot. It's no longer a pilot. It's a proven concept. So it changes how it's referenced in the legislation.
So just to clarify, the way the bill was originally written, it said consistent with US Green Building Council Lead Innovation Credit 55 for reducing bird collisions. Now the language would read consistent with the US Green Building Council's Innovation Credit for reducing bird collisions.
We had a motion on the technical amendment, and we had a second. Any more discussion? All in favor of the technical amendment, say aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Technical amendment moves unanimously. Now do I hear
The bill
favorable
as
motion?
amended.
Move
Second.
the bill as amended, and we have a second. Any discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Is anyone opposed? We have Delegate Chisholm and Delegate Shalega opposed. Lindsay, do you have the vote count?
I do, thank you.
Thank you. Let's move on to House Bill 58, open meetings. Foreman is not in the room, but Lindsay, can you tell us what the bill does?
So this bill makes the State Ethics Commission subject to the enhanced open meetings requirements. So for those of you who have been working with the subcommittee for a while, or the committee as a whole, there's certain economic and regional development organizations and other public bodies that are subject to additional requirements under the Open Meetings Act. This has been like a trend over the past few years. And generally, these requirements include making available on the body's website each open meeting agenda and other specified documents at least 48 hours in advance of the meeting. They must offer live video streaming of each portion of a meeting that's held in open session. The body must also maintain on its website past meeting minutes for at least 5 years after the date of the meeting, and a complete and unedited archive video recording of the open meeting for at least 1 year after the date of the meeting. The sponsor offered 2 amendments to the bill. The cross file of the bill in the Senate has adopted these same amendments. The first requires the Department of Information Technology to provide the technical staff support and equipment necessary to live stream the open meetings of the Ethics Commission. And the other one, it changes the effective date of the bill.
Lindsay, can we move both of those amendments simultaneously, or we do?
Yeah, sure. No, you can move them together.
Move the
We have a-
amendments.
Second. We have the amendments moved and seconded. All in favor, say aye. Anyone opposed? Okay, the amendments pass unanimously. Does anyone want to move the bill
Move
favorably?
Move the bill as amended.
I have a question.
Go ahead, Delegate Kipke.
You're on a roll. I'm sorry for slowing you down, Chairman. I know this is a different bill and it impacts a different commission than one that we heard in the past, Lindsay, where there was testimony that all of this effort at transparency is basically useless because they're just going to say what they're discussing is confidential. But I just want to verify that that wouldn't be the case with the State Ethics Commission, or would it?
Oh, well, it would be to the extent that they have the right to close their meetings. So meetings that are open, this would apply, the streaming and all of that would apply to the open meetings. But to the extent that they can close their meeting, then they still get to close their meeting.
Okay, so how do we know the open part of their meeting is of any value currently? Was there any testimony to that? I mean, it seems like there's going to be expense made for the streaming, and there's certainly a bureaucratic effort that will need to be made, and paperwork. How do I find that that's valuable? Is most of their work private, or is it trivial what's public? I'm just wondering, because I know in some bodies that's the case.
It is. I'm trying to find the exact figure because you're right. They do have closed meetings. But the requirement to close a meeting, those are set through the Open Meetings Act. So they have to, announce that they're going to be closing their meetings, have a vote on the closed meeting, and speak generally to the reason that they're closing the meeting, like the exception under the Open Meetings Act as to why they don't have to be having an open meeting. And I thought that there was a figure. I'm looking at the sponsor's testimony right now. And he said a typical meeting of the Ethics Commission includes approximately 1 hour in open session followed by 2 hours of closed session. So you're getting
Okay.
about a third of their meeting that would be streamed, like we are doing this meeting right now, so that someone who's not able to attend in person. And then as part of that open meeting, they would say, we're going into closed session now to blank, and they would have a vote to close the session.
Okay, that answers my question. Thank you.
Have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? All in favor of moving favorably on the bill, please say aye. Any opposed? None opposed. Okay, that bill passes unanimously. Let's move on to House Bill 63. This is the Tasty Invasive Species Bill.
So this bill, as was originally introduced, renames the Certified Local Farm Enterprise Program to be the Certified Local Farm and Chesapeake Invasive Species Provider Program. Excuse me, expands the program's purpose to include preferences for the purchase of food made from specified invasive species and makes conforming changes. The sponsor offered amendments on this bill. She is here also to speak to these, but the first alters the name of the program to be the Certified Local Farm and Fish Program, just a little bit more streamlined. Requires the Office for the Certified Local Farm and Fish Program to submit a certain annual consolidated report to the General Assembly committees on program implementation and participation, and also changes the effective date of the bill.
Delegate Charkoudian, welcome to the Government Operations Subcommittee. Would you like to speak to your bill?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Sure. I think that this was one we heard relatively recently. Folks are familiar with a requirement that we incorporate local food into state purchasing. And this adds a fish component, but specifically invasive species. And so what it does is it incentivizes the removal of invasive species from the Chesapeake Bay and its tributaries, and the serving of that tasty and high protein food in our state institutions. The amendments are to streamline the name, as was said, as well as when we originally put the bill together a couple of years ago, we had reports that were coming from the Board of Public Works to Ag and vice versa, but we didn't have the reports coming to the General Assembly. So we've added that report, and moving the date earlier is going to allow Marbidco to be able to use the grant funds that we have for this purpose for aggregation and processing. It will allow us to use those funds in July of this year to start supporting some of the aggregation and processing of blue catfish.
Delegate Kipke has his hand up. So before I go to Mr. McHenry, Delegate Kipke.
I was just going to suggest that we change it to tasty invasive species, since invasive species sounds so unpleasant, but since you've already changed it to fish, I won't offer my amendment. Thank you.
Thanks.
Although I do like that amendment.
I do too. Steve McHenry, welcome.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Good to see you and the other members of the committee. Delegate Charkoudian has said it all, so I'm just here for questions.
Thank you. Nick, your hand's still up? As long as it's up, do you want to move the amendment?
With the amendments.
Second.
Second.
Right. All in favor of the amendments, say aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed to the amendments? Amendments pass unanimously. Would anyone like to move favorably on the bill?
Move
the
favorable
bill.
with amendment.
Bill.
Second.
Okay, move the bill as amended. Any further discussion on the bill? All in favor, say aye. All
Aye.
opposed?
Aye.
No,
Aye.
not opposed. Bill passes unanimously. Thank you, Delegate Charkoudian. We have HB 124 mandated reports. This is the speaker's bill. Lindsay, will you tell us what it does?
So this bill repeals specified statutory reporting requirements that are obsolete, duplicative, or unnecessary, and it consolidates, reschedules, and clarifies certain reporting requirements for the purposes of efficiency and practicality, and it also makes some technical changes. Excuse me. So generally, DLS was tasked with conducting a review of mandated reports of the state to identify opportunities to streamline the reporting, and this bill is a result of that report. There are a number of amendments that I sent you on this bill. So I want to clarify, and we have some folks here to talk about these amendments as well. But sort of broadly, We have an amendment that deals with MHEC and the Maryland Longitudinal Data System Center. This amendment was not offered in testimony on this bill at the time of the hearing, but it was offered on the Senate side. And the Senate cross-file on the bill has incorporated this amendment. They just voted on the bill last week, and that amendment hasn't hit the web yet, but this amendment was incorporated on the Senate side. There's also an amendment that came from MDE. This one was offered at the hearing. It was sponsored by Delegate Chair Pena-Milnick. There's a third amendment that came from MDEM relating to the 911 board that was in testimony that was offered by MDEM at the time of the bill hearing. And this amendment has also been offered adopted on the Senate side. Sorry, the MDE amendment was not adopted on the Senate side, not because they didn't like it or something. They just never considered that amendment on the Senate side. And then the last one modifies reporting for the Maryland Legal Services Corporation. And that one also was adopted on the Senate side. And that was not originally offered in testimony on the House side, but is here for your consideration. I can go through each of those in more detail, but I wanted to, that's the landscape of the 4 amendments on this bill that I sent out via email. The first amendment, and I'm just looking to see if Ross holds.
Where's this bill in the Senate?
They voted the bill, but the reporting hasn't hit the system yet. That makes sense. You know, they voted the bill last week.
It's out of subcommittee?
Out of the EE committee.
Okay, but it hasn't hit for third read yet.
Right.
Okay, thank you.
So the first amendment is it repeals the requirement that the Maryland Higher Education Commission compile, submit, and publish certain reports. As the Maryland Longitudinal Data System Center advises that report duplicates an existing reporting requirement, and instead it adds that reporting language into another report that's made by the center. But what it does is retains MHEC's role in collecting data from institutions of higher education. So this amendment was supported by MHEC and the Longitudinal Data System Center. I'm not sure if there's anyone here to speak to it. And like I said, this one was adopted on the Senate side in the committee.
Anyone here to speak to this amendment? You, why don't you go ahead and read the others, and then unless someone has a question about this one.
The second one from MDE, this is the one that was not adopted on the Senate side because MDE approached Chair Pena-Milnick on this one. And Gabrielle Leach is here to speak to that. I see her name listed. This one alters reporting dates for reports by the Maryland Commission on Climate Change, the Department of the Environment, the Bay Restoration Fund Advisory Committee, the Office of Recycling, and it moves an ongoing reporting requirement that's for the Department of the Environment that was previously an uncodified language into code. So because this is an ongoing reporting requirement, we generally like those to appear in code, not in uncodified language. So it's just the same requirement, but it's moved into the code.
Anyone here to speak to that amendment? Gabrielle Leach, are you here to speak?
Hi, how are you? Thank you so much. Yeah, so when we were working with DLS, when they reached out, there was a little bit of confusion and we were left off the original report for this bill. So that's when we coordinate with DLS. They were totally on board. And then we reached out to the chair for the amendment. And basically, it just gets all these different reports that kind of have similar topics to be on the same date. It's December 31st. So it just helps us to kind of organize, and also when we can combine a report, that we can have it all at the same time, not different times like September, October, so forth. So it just helps with our end to make sure everything is organized and consistent, and it helps our team when putting these reports together.
Questions for Ms. Leach? Okay, thank you. Lindsay, are there 2 additional amendments?
Yep. The next one, Anna Sierra is here from MDEM. This one alters dates for reporting information by the Maryland 911 board. This was a new reporting requirement from just a year or 2 ago, a bill sponsored by Delegate Hill in the House side. And the reporting requirement was put in as for the reports submitted in 2022 through 2027. But MDM advised that the 2022 report, because that was reporting on fiscal year 2021 information, they didn't actually have the new data to analyze and include in that report. So this just pushes those dates back to, rather than 2022 through 2027, makes it 2023 through 2028.
Anna Sierra from MDM.
Yes, sir. Thank you very much. Council covered it actually exactly perfectly. The bill was passed last year, and when it was passed, the new reporting requirement was added in the third reader, so we couldn't kind of directly engage with the challenges on the dates. We did bring it to DLS's attention this fall, but I think very similarly to MDE, it just got left out of the final report. We have talked to the original sponsor in the Senate. She has no problems with the changes in the dates.
Thank you. Questions for MDM? Thanks very much. Lindsay, can we hear the last amendment, please?
The last one modifies the reporting requirement to allow the Maryland Legal Services Corporation to submit data on individuals covered by fiscal year rather than calendar year. And Deb Seltzer and I think was Riley Schubert here. Yep, Riley Schubert is here as well to speak to that one.
Deb, do you want to start?
Sure. Thank you, Mr. Chair. This requested change is to align the report for the Access Council and Evictions Program to the fiscal year, which is how the funding flows for that. So it would align with the program cycles and the funding for this program.
Deb, who else is here to speak to the bill, Lindsay?
I know that Riley Schubert worked on this with Deb, but I don't know if there's anything more to add really to that.
No, I'm good, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Okay, good. So it looks like the amendments we want to move are 1, 3, and 4. The other
I mean,
amendment,
there's 4 amendments. So you can do
second one
them
didn't
separately,
move.
or if anyone has any questions about them, or you could just do them all together, whatever is easiest.
Just
for
to
everyone.
recap, the second one was not adopted by the Senate.
Oh, the MDE one, no, did not go before the Senate committee, so they didn't consider that one.
They didn't even consider it.
Right. That's
Okay.
why I wanted to clarify. It's not that they considered it and said no.
Okay,
That
yeah.
was not offered on the Senate side.
Thank you. I misunderstood. Delegate Kipke?
Thank you. Lindsay, are we eliminating any valuable reporting? So, for example, annual reports about the effectiveness of a government entity or anything like that?
I wasn't directly involved with this report that DLS did, but the idea is to only either consolidate, and to the extent that any report is repealed, it's because it's obsolete or duplicative in some reason that makes it unnecessary. This is not supposed to be a substantive bill in any way. It's just if there's duplicative reports, or if a reporting requirement ended after some period of time, or just doesn't make any sense because the program that it's reporting on doesn't exist anymore, or something like that. Some reason that the report is now unnecessary is the idea behind this bill.
Okay, well, I intend to support it because I support that concept, but I do, before we vote on it in full committee, I'm going to read through the very tedious bill that's before us just to make sure that there's nothing substantive that we're losing out on. So I just want to put that out there. Thank you.
Delegate Kipke, are you comfortable with moving the bill out of subcommittee?
Yeah, I am. I get the concept that's trying to be achieved, and I found that the department is forthright about things, so I don't question them, but it is a long and tedious thing. So I just want to say I may bring something up at a later point, but I don't anticipate that, but I do want to just put on the, make you aware of that.
And also, just to clarify, this report is done in conjunction with the agencies that are impacted. So it's not DLS on its own deciding whether or not a report is necessary.
Thank you. Delegate Kaiser.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. In terms of Delegate Kipke's concerns, my experience is that the things that are still in the books relate to programs that often don't exist anymore. And so there's a lot of that, or that, we've ended the program, we've let something sunset, so we certainly don't need to report on it anymore. And it's the sad part is that our agencies end up having to do these reports and not a soul out there is looking to them. So this is a real chance to eliminate some government work that doesn't need to be done.
Thank you for that.
I'd like to move the four amendments together.
Second,
Okay, we have a motion to move the amendments in a second. Any further discussion on the amendments? All in favor, say aye. All opposed?
aye.
Opposed, the amendments moved. Motion to move the bill as amended.
So moved, so moved.
Second,
A motion to move the amended bill. Move favorable on the amended bill. All in favor, say aye.
aye.
Anyone opposed? Thank you, Lindsay. That one passes the subcommittee unanimously. We're up to House Bill 141. Delegate Chi is in the room. Lindsay, do you want to begin?
This bill renames the Commission on LGBTQ Affairs to be the Commission on LGBTQIA plus Affairs and alters the membership of the commission. The sponsor offered 2 amendments on the bill to make a clarifying change relating to the duties of the commission. It previously referred to issues affecting women and, so it strikes that women and language, and expands the diversity categories that are sought to be reflected in the membership of the commission. I wanted to raise, and I circulated the third reader printing of the cross file on this bill, Senate Bill 251, because they adopted quite similar language, the striking of that women and language. But when it comes to the diversity categories that are listed, they only added gender identity. And again, I spoke with the Senate staff on this, and they weren't offered the longer list that Delegate Chi has offered to this committee. So they didn't consider it.
Thank you. Delegate Chi. Would you like to speak to your bill?
Hi, thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, colleagues, for the opportunity. This is actually a quite simple bill to technically fix the name so that it's more in keeping with the time and how our diverse and growing LGBTQIA plus communities refer to themselves, and to be more inclusive. And also because of the need for inclusivity, the commission would like to add a few more seats so that the community geographically and culturally could be more included at the table. So essentially that's what it does. I don't know if you have any specific questions regarding to that. I think this woman plus thing was an oversight from when we passed the bill. It was not intended to include a woman's issue as much as gender identity and sexual orientation issues.
Questions for the bill sponsor?
Delegate Tavares.
Yeah, I don't have a question. I just want to move favorable.
Second, but
We
we
have-
have to do the amendments.
The
We have to do
amendments first.
amendments first. Delegate Tavares, are you moving the amendments?
Yes, sir.
Second,
Thank you. On the amendments, all in favor, say aye.
A quick question.
Aye.
Any opposed?
I had a question on the amendment.
Well, you have a question on the amendments. I'm sorry, Delegate Hill, please
Yeah,
go
sorry,
ahead.
sorry, Delegate Chi. So
We lost your audio.
Delegate Hill, you went on mute.
your preference, Delegate Chi, is that we take the 2 amendments that you have with the longer list, and then when the Senate bill comes over, that we amend it to match yours, not that we amend to match the Senate bill. I want to be clear. Is that correct?
Well, this, of course, I would prefer, but I am not going to fight tooth and nail on this because I respect the commission's opinion on this. They are really the people from that community who are advising the government agencies on policy issues. And it was at their request that I advanced these provisions for consideration. I think the spirit of the commission is to be inclusive of all dimensions of diversity. I think that's probably why they listed so many ancestral, national origin, color, disability. But I think a commission like this naturally is intended to be inclusive. So, it's up to the wisdom of this committee to decide how many of those that you want to include.
Delegate Hill, are you satisfied with your vote?
Yes, I just wanted to be clear because we could do it either way. I wanted to be clear what Delegate Chi wanted. That's all.
Delegate Chisholm, is this, go ahead, please.
I think it's on the amendment. So they're asking to go from 15 to 21 members. Is that correct? I'm kind of lost on where we are.
Well, that's the existing bill. It's fine. It's not the amendment. The bill would have already expanded the membership of the commission. The amendment is relating to, if you're looking at the bill on the bottom of page 2. So there's a requirement that the members shall, to the extent practicable, reflect, as it's currently written in the bill, reflect the age, gender, sexual orientation, racial, ethnic, socioeconomic, and geographic diversity of the state. And so the amendment is adding to that list gender identity or expression, ancestral, national origin, color, disability, religious, sex.
Gotcha. All right, thank
And
you.
the Senate, as I said, they adopted only gender identity adding to that list, but they didn't consider an amendment offering a longer list. It wasn't offered to them.
Thank you.
Anything else on the amendments, or can we call the vote? Okay, I believe it was a unanimous vote. Now, if someone would like to move the amended bill.
Move the bill as amended.
Second.
Second.
And to move favorable on House Bill 141, all in favor, say aye.
I have a question.
Aye.
Oh, I'm sorry, Delegate Chisholm, I saw your hand just.
Only if
now.
we have Delegate Cheese to it. Yes, I still see her here. So I started reading I guess, the findings of this commission. And obviously they point out a lot of problems, but as a matter of, I guess, information, are you making any progress with the commission, I guess is my question.
Thank you. It's a great question. Just to inform the committee, we passed the bill in 2021, I think, and in 2022, just over a year ago in January of 2022 was when the commission first formed. And it took a couple of meetings to even fill all the seats. And according to this report you and I both received, they have done quite extensive community outreach and agency outreach to promote themselves as a resource, to connect people with resources, and to identify some key policy priorities. And that they also formed some internal working committees to focus on certain issues. That's what I'm aware of, but there is a member of the commission who can speak to that. Actually, Lee Blinder is here. So they can speak to that if you would like to ask them to speak.
Lee, do you have anything to add?
Thank you so much, Delegate Shi, for your hard work to bring this bill about and to ensure that we're updating things to be commensurate with the Commission's requests and to really reflect the diversity of our community. Appreciate the question, Delegate Chisholm, about what activities the Commission has been engaged in. We are the kind of like new kid on the block for the commissions, and we're really thrilled to be here. And part of our work is really going around to all of our communities, you know, not just during Pride, during the summer months. And Pride is kind of extending on throughout the year. It's 24/7 for many of us. So we'll be working hard to connect with all of our community throughout the entire state and to bring those issues into all of the government spaces. And as Delegate Shi mentioned, to continue our work with all of the state agencies and the new administration and leadership.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, Delegate Chisholm, you done? Okay, thank you. Your hands down now. So we do have a motion, a favorable motion and a second. Call for a vote. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Who's opposed to this bill? Delegate Shalega. Delegate Kipke. And Delegate Chisholm. Do I have the vote right?
Yes, and for the benefit of folks who might be watching and aren't in our Zoom meeting, Delegate Taveras wrote in the chat that she is in favor of this bill.
Okay, you have the vote, Lindsay?
Yep.
Okay, call the last bill. Go to HB 245.
This bill, as originally introduced, would have required the Office of State Procurement in the Department of General Services to maintain a list of units required to report on their compliance with the Minority Business Enterprise Program to the Governor's Office of Small Minority and Women Business Affairs. There was testimony offered by GOSBA on the bill that was then turned into an amendment that I circulated to you all. that would, rather than having the Office of State Procurement maintain the list of units that are required to comply with the MBE program, instead requires the Governor's Office of Small Minority and Women Business Affairs to include an attestation as to the accuracy of the list that's included in their annual report. They do an aggregate report, and then also do an audit every 3 years to ensure the accuracy of that list. So the origins of this bill came from the DLS library and their concerns about tracking the individual reports that go to the Joint Committee on Fair Practices and State Personnel Oversight, in addition to the aggregated report to GOSBA that then also comes to the General Assembly. So when running that GOSBA amendment by the DLS library, they noted that there might not be a need for the Joint Committee on Fair Practices and State Personnel Oversight to receive all of the individual reports, but could instead benefit from the aggregated report that GOSBA puts together. So the co-chairs of that Joint Committee are Senator Lamb and Delegate Attar, and I ran that change by them, changing the receipt of the report from 70 plus individual unit reports going to the Joint Committee to just the aggregated GOSBA report, and they both are in favor of that. So that is also reflected in the amendment that I circulated to you all. So there's two pieces now to the amendment. The first is changing the reporting to the Joint Committee from the individual reports that are in subsection A to the aggregated GOSBA report in subsection B, and then also the requirement that GOSBA attest to the accuracy of the list of units that they include in their aggregated report, that they actually are representing all of the folks who were supposed to report under subsection A to them.
Questions or comments on the bill? Do I hear a motion on the amendments?
The amendments.
Second.
Second.
Opposed? The amendments pass. Motion on the bill is amended.
Second.
The bill is amended.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? None opposed. Okay. Thank you, committee. We got through the whole list.
With time to spare for lunch.
Ed,
Will this
all
be
right.
on a voting list for Friday?
It should be,
yeah, it will be.
we'll meet after the committee hearings tomorrow. The subcommittee chairs will meet and determine what's on the Friday vote list.
Gotcha.
All right. I'll see everybody in committee at 1 o'clock.
Thank you.